Good morning. It's my pleasure to see everyone who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. My name is Olga Atamanova. It's been 10 years of the war, and today is day 652 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And traditionally, I want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about our heroic resistance and our fight for freedom. So today we have invited you for a presentation of a sociological survey. We will be talking about the changes in concerns of Ukrainians within the last couple of years. Joining me in the studio today are Andrii Borovyk, Executive Director at Transparency International Ukraine, and Anastasiya Mazurok, Deputy Executive Director of Operations at Transparency International Ukraine. So let's talk about this survey. It's the second survey by Transparency International where you were studying the opinion of mayors and the citizens about the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. So, Mr. Andrii, let's start with what you were going to survey. Well, thank you for your question. Let me remind all the spectators that in September and in March and April, we were having the first wave of this survey where we identified the main things that are of concern to Ukrainians, and 73% of Ukrainians said that during the reconstruction of Ukraine, corruption will be back. Then the citizens were afraid of control over the reconstruction of Ukraine, and third place was taken by a response which said that the citizens are afraid of resumption of battle operations. And in the end of this year, we wanted to see how the sentiment of Ukrainians have changed in view of all of these events that unfolded in Ukraine. I mean, those stories that were unfolding in corruption or anti-corruption backgrounds. So I would like to give the floor to Ms. Anastasiya, who will tell us about the methodology and the results. I would like to ask our technical team to put the presentation on the screen. Thank you for invitation. Pleasure being here. I would like to emphasize that this data is important for different categories of population from the point of view of government management. They have to understand how to communicate the results to the society, how to communicate to the society in general, what are the solutions to be proposed. From the point of view of the business directors and those who interact with the Ukrainians, it's important to understand the context. What are the problems that are of concern for Ukrainians? What do Ukrainians want? What they aspire for? And for us, average Ukrainians, it's important to understand what is the temperature of sentiment of the people around us, so to say, because sometimes it seems to me that the way I'm thinking and people around me think is a standard opinion. And in times of quick transformations that we live in, it's important to understand the importance of this data, what is of concern to us. So as it was mentioned before, the previous wave was in spring, before the tragedy with Kakhovka Dam and many other events that happened during this year. So we've made a telephone survey in November this year. We've contacted the adults who reside in Ukraine for the time being. We've covered 1,000, a little bit more than 1,000 respondents, and which ensures the representative nature of this survey. And another component is 10 in-depth interviews with the mayors or deputy mayors of deoccupied cities. We don't name the cities because we were guaranteeing anonymity to ensure better validity of responses, but they were both the large cities, the regional capitals and the cities in Kiev, Dnipropetrovsk, and Mykolaiv region. So we were trying to cover different regions to understand the sentiment. And yet another thing to mention, that there will be marks in blue, red colors to mark the changes. If there are such marks, it means that there are changes that are significant in terms of comparison. So a little bit about the portrait and profile of the respondents. It's a representative survey, as I've mentioned, and it's important to understand what origins are sorted to which region, because we'll provide the results by regions. So this drawdown included 13% of internally displaced persons, and demographic profile of the respondents, as I've mentioned, the gender and age structure is in compliance with the gender and age structure of the population of Ukraine. So let's proceed to the first results, the key problems that are of concern to Ukrainians and which, in opinion of Ukrainians, exist for today. Among the top 3 problems, there is no sensation, there is nothing new, so it's armed aggression, corruption, and the scale of destruction in Ukraine that are of concern to the population. But what's important to emphasize on this slide, we see the significant growth of level of seriousity of the problems that exist now. And we'd like to emphasize that the armed aggressions and the large scale of destruction were of lesser concern, and corruption as one of the problems that are of concern to Ukrainians has grown 11%. It's a significant figure in this regard, and we see that there is concern about the state of affairs in the country, and there is a public demand with regard to the matters relating to the economic development of the state, and we'll talk about it in detail later on. We, as I mentioned, have internally displaced persons in a drawdown, and we were asking them about their intentions to come back to their previous places of residence that they had before the full-scale invasion. And the trend we're observing is that 63% say that they intend to come back, and this figure has not changed. The number of those who say that they plan to stay where they reside for the time being has grown a little bit, but not because the people changed their opinion, but rather because they started hesitating. And among the factors that hold people back from returning to their previous place of residence, if we generalize it, they are all factors related to the war, to the security, to the absence of shelter, to the scale of destruction there, or that the territory is occupied. So the majority of the respondents emphasize those factors, but the frequency of their responses grows. Like Mr. Andrii said during his introduction, during the previous wave, it was a little bit unexpected for us to see the results that people are afraid of corruption more than they are afraid of the war in terms of future recovery. In this case, this time, the picture is even brighter, if we can say so. We see that talking about the concerns or fright about the future recovery, that number of concerns has grown. People see bigger number of concerns that may impede the future reconstruction, and among the leading factors are the absence of control that may result in embezzlement of funds, use improper practices or low quality materials, then the return of the corruption schemes and embezzlements of funds allocated for reconstruction, and that the scale of destruction will be so high that we won't be able to fulfill the reconstruction. So what does it tell us? We say that the society is getting fatigued, the society is getting adapted, and the society sees the violation of the public agreement. Like we all fight for justice, and the society gets more sober, and they put more requirements to this social processes, so we may revert to it, but it's important to remember and understand it here. So talking about the general expectations to future reconstruction processes, we see that there is a demand to have the reconstruction to contemplate some strategic plans, that people who lost their housing, they should have it rebuilt now, and that every affected community, they have their specifics that should be considered. General dynamics and priorities of the tasks have not changed, but what we see that there is a statistically significant difference between the answers about the fact that people say the plans of reconstruction have to take into account the development of battle operations, which correlates with what the mayors told us when they were saying that every community has its own specifics in both in terms of scale of destruction and number of population, number of internally displaced people who are currently resided in that community. And the mayor said they have a demand for development of those strategies, to have them developed either in a joint manner with involvement of experts or for advice and consulting services from the experts. So it's a very important component. Talking about what Ukrainians think about the redistribution of funds for reconstruction, how the funds should be managed. Half of the respondents say that funds should be allocated on a project-to-project basis. A third of Ukrainians say that the funds should be distributed through the central budget and on a project-to-project basis, and the minority says that the funds should be allocated to the central budget. Well, about the forecast, we see that a share of those who say that the reconstruction process will take 10 years or more has grown 13%. So the longer we spend waging the full-scale war, the higher is intensity of the adaptation mechanisms in people, and people evaluate or estimate the war as potentially long-lasting, and the same is with the reconstruction of economy. So if we ask them how long will their economic recovery take, more than 60% respond that it would take more than 10 years. However, what's important that was not present previous year, we asked the Ukrainians to evaluate the current reconstruction processes. We've seen that 46% of Ukrainians say that the processes that they know about, they are generally in accord with their expectations. And there is a regional specifics. People from northern and eastern regions, they are more satisfied with those processes. Meanwhile, Kievites are quite skeptical, but again, that's pretty clear because Kievites are usually more active, more skeptical to most of the societal processes with a lot of demands to what's going on. So those figures are pretty logical. Well, 1 in 3 Ukrainians had seen the examples of reconstruction, something that is being reconstructed or is reconstructed, and 74% say that they're generally satisfied with those examples that they were witnessing. If we review it by regions, we see that the largest number of people who know about the examples of reconstruction are in the east, Kiev, and north. In the east and in the south, there is a smaller share of such people who were witnessing the reconstruction. Well, talking about the sources of funds for reconstruction, Ukrainians are aware of many such sources, and the dominating leader here in perception of Ukrainians, well, we don't talk about the real numbers, about comparison of budgets, we're talking about perceptions of Ukrainians. We see that Ukrainian authority, in opinion of 60% of Ukrainians, is the institution that funds some reconstruction aspects. Then comes the international community, 20% thinks so, then businesses, and then the population of Ukraine, who funds it from their pockets, so to say. Then another quite interesting slide, there's a lot of data here, let me comment it. 17% of Ukrainians say that they were affected by destruction of their property. Part of them is real estate, 3% say it's land plot, 2% car, and 3% business. There is the distribution by regions, but there are also the figures demonstrating the amount of financial losses. About a quarter say that they are the amounts up to 50,000 hryvnia, 50 to 100,000, about a third. But 13% of respondents said their losses amounted to million and more hryvnia. We've also asked them, those people who suffered that loss, we asked them whether they submitted for applied for compensation, and they said that 32% of those people said that yes, they did apply for compensation, and out of them, almost, well, more than a half got this compensation. And it was interesting to us to find out why didn't people apply for compensation in case they suffered losses. And 37% mentioned that the state has more important needs to be funded. This is why I don't apply, because I think that there are people who need it more. And 13% say that there are people who suffered even worse and they need better support than I do. And another factor, 26% said that they don't believe that they would get something, or otherwise they didn't have time to take care of it. And then there was a response that it's too early to take care of it because the lands are still occupied. So, talking about the help to Ukrainians, 42% of population with the beginning of the full-scale invasion were receiving some some type of aid. We didn't ask for details. People could just add some support from volunteers, aid from volunteers, or some temporary residence aid, but in fact almost half of the population says that they were getting some type of aid. And if we check it by regions, it's 88% in the east, 45% in Kiev, 59% in the north, 63% in the south. And we were asking them whom did they get that aid from. They said from international organizations, 35%, 33% from the state, from Ukrainian civil organizations, 28%, and international civil organizations, 25%, and local governments, 19%. Well, and in fact, Ukrainians do understand and realize how important is the input of international donors in the everyday support of Ukrainians. 43% of Ukrainians say that international partners provide a very significant contribution to the reconstruction processes. However, at the same time, the majority, well, not the majority, but the large fraction of population don't know who contributed what. But we see there is a huge correlation. The more aware the people are, the higher is their evaluation of the input of international partners. And there is also the age correlation. The younger are the respondents, the better is their awareness and the higher is their evaluation. What's also important to understand is that the population during previous wave and this wave keeps saying about pretty high level of readiness and importance to get involved in the reconstruction processes, in civil hearings. So there is a demand to be a part of this influence, to be a part of changes happening in Ukraine. 92%, almost every Ukrainian says that is really important. And it may seem that the problems may become more serious, it can create some apathy, but in reality it's not about apathy as we see, it's about the demand for influence, demand for changes. And I think there is certain pragmatism in the vision of the future, type of a sobriety. I don't know whether I can use this word here. But what we see, that 40% of the people say they are ready to get involved personally in plannings, in public hearings, which is a very big figure, in fact. The demand is also high on transparency of information, control of funding processes, funding sources, control of stages, and control of quality of works. Well, we can take the word transparency just abstractly, but here it is very concrete. People want to have access to information about funding of any changes happening in the country, and about the fulfillers of those processes, those reconstruction processes. Ukrainians say that there should be a reasonable competitiveness and high quality. So there is a high demand to make sure that the work should be done in a quality manner, and many understand that high quality usually means not so low price, like quality, speed, and price. There is, well, something in this triangle will always be high. Well, So what I've mentioned about the reputation and experience of fulfillment of such works to become a part of this infrastructure reconstruction as a key criteria to the fulfilling parties. And then a couple of words about the mayors and their deputies. I mean, the mayors of those 10 occupied cities, what they were saying, what are the key challenges they're seeing in their work, what are their demands, and how they can be helped. Among the key challenges, we see that there are demands, as I mentioned, for reconstruction, demands for reconstruction strategy, demand for reconstruction vision, both on national level and on their level of the community, level of the city. We have understanding that we have to rethink it. Some might have something already on the way. There is some frustration in some cities, though they don't know what to start with, how to start, but the demand is pretty high to be coordinated on the level of the government, to understand how the government as an integral organism can work with it, because sometimes they don't have enough information. In the same way, they're saying that there is a growing demand for information support with digitalizing, well, not digitalizing, I apologize, but with the understanding of amount of their population in their regions, because sometimes they cannot do it themselves. Also, they emphasize the importance of awareness about the scale of destruction and taking into account the needs of internally displaced persons, because sometimes the share of IDPs significantly changes the demographic composition of the community and restructures the problems in certain ways that should be solved among those faced by the government officials. Also, they mention about the improvement of human resources, because there is a need for new specialists who understand the architectural solutions, modern architectural solutions, modern technologies, and sometimes there is not enough capacity to engage such specialists, and they just don't exist in such a quantity as we want them to. And that said, there are some positive things, like many people really understand that the challenges of reconstruction are not the problems we're facing, but also the opportunities for transformation that will help us reinforce ourselves, become stronger, become better, and respectively they see the capacity of their communities in exchange of experience, getting the experts involved, and to have the communities ready for those changes. So talking about the key needs, they need the support with methodology and strategy development on the level of the cities, exchange of experience with other countries that were having the same or similar experience, or support by the experts who had this experience. Also, they say that they don't always have opportunity to visit the sister cities, and help in this regard would be very valuable for them. We were also talking about the specialists and the available technologies to understand the ways to reinforce the communication with their communities, because there is a huge demand for that. They understand the need, but they don't always understand the full set of modern tools and the communication standards. At the same time, they mention that they deem it necessary to empower the local businesses to involve the veterans or IDPs in those activities, and at the same time they were talking about the strategies to take into account the needs of IDPs and veterans and other categories of population in modern strategies during modern planning, which is extremely important. So basically we're coming to the key summaries of our survey. Let me just emphasize that something that we've mentioned today, that the Ukrainians see the war and corruption and destruction of the infrastructure as the key problems of the country for the time being. Ukrainians have become a little bit more decisive and ready to development of negative scenarios, but at the same time they become more pragmatic. They estimate the duration of the war as long term, as well as the duration of reconstruction of the country and economy of Ukraine. Among those surveyed by us, 17% are those whose property was either damaged or destroyed, including vehicles, housing, and businesses. 30% applied for compensation and got such compensations. About those who did not apply, they say that the majority of them say that they either don't believe or that the state has better or more important priorities to fund. Also, we see that the current reconstruction processes are evaluated pretty high by Ukrainians, but we understand that there is no clear realization of what's going on and what are the plans on the level of the country, and respectively sometimes it creates certain distrust. At the same time, we're saying that a major part, well, not major, but significant part of Ukrainians, 43%, emphasize the significant contribution of international partners to all reconstruction processes. However, those existing reconstruction processes exceed the expectations of 46% of Ukrainians, and 1 in 3 adult Ukrainians either know of have seen the examples of what was reconstructed, and the responses are positive. 76% are satisfied with those results. And talking about the key risks that Ukrainians are concerned with are the high scale of destruction, return of corruption risks, and resumption of battle operations. And we are also saying that a share of Ukrainians has grown who think that the reconstruction will take more than 10 years. Now the percentage of such Ukrainians is 73. Thank you for your attention. Let me give the floor to, well, thank you very much for this survey. I think it's so multi-layered and broad scale. So let's reflect a little bit. Let's talk about the central government. You've mentioned the mayors. I understand during the in-depth interviews you had an opportunity to get high quality results. So were you able to survey the concerns of the mayors with regard to corruption? What the mayors are afraid? I understand that for the local government it's a hell of a question. All the mayors understand there are expectations from the community that they are under the microscope, and the survey confirms it. People are ready to get involved, people are ready to act, people are ready to participate. So what are the concerns of the mayors? Well, the first response would be that there was really a statement that in their opinion the perception of corruption and that this corruption is total, it's a little bit exaggerated. Because on one hand, it's of benefit to some enemies because it's just a trend. But on the other hand, there are some explanations of the cases that can be presented in media as or as a corruption component, but there might be some logical explanation that those facts or those cases do not contain any corruption. So there is no overall omnipresent corruption as it's presented in the media. But at the same time, they understand that there is a high demand of the civil society, and those whom we surveyed, they are ready to make the processes 100% transparent to ensure control in all stages, to get civil experts or international experts involved in all those processes to control every phase of the process. And in the same way, they are ready to ensure that the dialogue between them and the national authority is the most efficient possible, to make sure that those instruments, those tools are synchronized from the point of view of anti-corruption practices and the processes of reconstruction themselves. Andrii, just 10 years ago, if we compare it to what we have now, we've made an incredible leap in countering corruption. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, if it is so, why do the concerns of our population with regard to corruption are still growing? What is it influenced by? Well, not our survey, but other surveys show that the situation has changed dramatically in perception of the people and generally. But talking about our specific survey, within this half a year, there was about 10 or more than 10 cases where corruption was in headlines of the news. So people do not discern it for themselves as I do, because one story is about the jackets and the eggs in the armed forces, and yet another story is when our anti-corruption agencies serve a note of suspicion to the head of Supreme Court, for example. So it's a result of work that we try to build within the next 10 years. And another story is something that's happening, and the citizens, the population, have to continue pushing to produce some reaction, to trigger some reaction. So those pictures are different. You know, they may say, look, corruption is everywhere. We have jackets, we have ex-deputies, judges, everybody all around the place. But if we ask them directly, like, have you ever faced any case of corruption? The majority would say no. And the fact that they never faced corruption doesn't necessarily mean that the corruption does not exist. But on the background of the high expectations, you know, they're counter-offensive. In the beginning of the year, we had a little bit exaggerated expectations. There is a word that I don't like, the flair of the previous year. It existed, but now it withdraws and people start getting more realistic. Now 10% more people think that the reconstruction will take more than 10 years because the people understand the complications in this way. They understand that complexity of the process. People got more adult, more realistic within this year, but the reality is not always pleasant, you know. Well, dear friends, let me invite you to our conversation. In case you have any questions or comments, we have questions online. We are asked, what are the main changes that you've noticed comparing to the first wave of survey? Well, first of all, it's a question of growing up through the prism of longer duration of the processes, more realistic evaluation of all of the processes in the society, social processes, then the higher demand by the society, who are now asking more questions from the government of all levels, authorities. And another component is their high readiness to get involved in all the civil and social processes. It's important for the people, and it continues to be a present thing. Well, you've mentioned that we've really made a long way. The fight with the corruption is efficient, but what do we have to do to make sure that our people, our population, sees it better? Well, it's always a good question. What should we do to make it more visible to the society? Well, we have the results, and it's not only about the government saying so, but it's something that our international partners say. The recent report by EU, it contains a large part on countering corruption, and which mentions that there is a lot of work to do, but there is a lot of achievement. But it's normal, because EU is a difficult way. What should we do to make it more visible to Ukrainians? Well, we don't have what we don't have to do for sure is to tell everybody that we've overcome corruption. We have to recognize the problem exists and to identify the way we react to it. So again, I would like to emphasize it. What happened after the 24th of February, when there is a scandalous story, in the majority of cases, there is usually either a political reaction or reaction from the law enforcement agencies. So we shouldn't just conceal the program. The first step to solve it is to recognize it, and then we demonstrate it, and we keep talking about how we limit it and not overcome it, because it exists in any country. And at the same time, we have to understand, we have to make sure that different politicians don't stop it, because on one hand the politicians say we're fine, we don't have corruption, and on the other hand they don't want to open electronic declarations. 100,000 people had to ask them for this, so they eventually do it. Well, it doesn't help a lot if it doesn't happen, because when people see that someone tries to conceal something, they think that everybody's corrupted there. So this generalization is of no help to us either, because the majority of people, they live with media and they see what they see in reality. We have another question. How efficiently does Ukraine fight corruption, in your opinion? I understand it's a general question, but it might be of the biggest concern to Ukrainians. Well, how efficiently comparing to what was happening during Yanukovych times? Well, now back then no one was doing anybody, but there is no such notion anymore. There is a progress. The index of corruption perception tells us quite clearly about this, but it's more about perception of corruption. We have plus 8 points within the next 10 years. So 100% is when there is no corruption, 0 is when there is nothing but corruption. So we have such progress. Yes, in the beginning of the next year, we'll have another publication of new results. And if we identify it as a factor, that's number one. Then let's get back to the Eurocommission report, where they mention certain success, 100 or 50 or a number of awards by anti-corruption court in Ukraine, the court which is mostly trusted among all of the judicial system. Like, here are the convictions, here are the imprisonments. So this is what you wanted, and the government could be more active in terms of, more proactive in terms of prevention, because this is something that cannot be done by any international partners, to continue communicating it, to reduce the tolerance to corruption among the population, something that is not yet done. I work with TI for 10 years and I wait for it to happen. You remember back in 2014 we had Crimea, slogan Crimea is Ukraine all over Ukraine, but there was no such slogan as corruption is bad. Well, comparing to the neighboring country of Poland, how far are we from them or from other countries that that are neighboring us? Well, you know, the index of corruption perception, it includes 180 countries. We have 33 points, and the average indicator in EU is 60. So yes, we're pretty far from there. But again, our experience with the measuring instruments, it demonstrates that in short-term perspective, it's real to come up with such changes that even using this indicator, we are about to grow. For example, Armenia was adding 8 points per year previously. So again, EU is very motley. For example, in Denmark it's 90 plus, but somewhere it's 40. But we haven't achieved a minimal level so far, but we're working in the right directions. Dear friends, do you have any questions on the floor? Meanwhile, let me ask a question. How efficient, in your opinion, is the work of our anti-corruption agencies? Because you probably understand all those processes the best. Well, talking about punishment, it's the investigation, prosecutor's office, court, prison. Well, I've already told you 150 convictions within the last couple of years. Just don't expect the people to start working as in the conveyor right away, but within the last couple of years we've improved. We had a lot of law enforcement agencies, employees getting involved. They expedited their work. Well, the quality of their work was pretty high on all levels, but I think the foundations that we've laid, they don't let the corruptioners get full political control. Yes, they have to be reinforced in those instruments, because those instruments that are currently available, that the expectations are pretty high. A lot of good people keep working, they're professional people. They have to expand their expertise, but we have the results for sure. We can see the headlines in the news. Like 2 weeks ago, the deputies came to them as customers, and there are multiple such stories within the last couple of years. Currently, a lot of news are discussed about the balance of such news in our information space. You keep talking about the facts that Russian propaganda uses this information. They try to ignite that fire to make an impression that we have corruption all over the place here. So how to find this balance? Well, first of all, we have to have the critical thinking. Don't read the Telegram channels who keep telling us that everything is bad. This is the first filter you should use. Secondly, this balance does not always depend on the readers. It depends on those who present the news. Unfortunately, we love bad news. Good news are not so interesting to us. Well, not only us. Well, not only us, the people in general. So they will have top ratings always. But again, critical thinking. The former head of Supreme Court of Ukraine was detained. Some might say like, yeah, corruption is even there. And I was thinking to myself, well, cool. Well, maybe from the point of view of image it's not so cool, but again, I'm curious about how much more people were involved in this story. So this is what I'm waiting to find out. So I think that more than 13, this is my subjective opinion. I think 10 plus, but from the point of view of the public sentiment, Nastya can tell you more about this. So I think that when we talk about the importance of communication, it's important to mention about the importance of fair and just communication, of objective communication, because any inclination or saying like everything is fine, everything is pink and rosy around us, this is a negative trend that creates unjustified, exaggerated expectations, like the example with counter-offensive, for example, like we kept saying that in the summer of 23 we're gonna drink coffee in Crimea, and the results that we demonstrate for the time being are about the disappointment that those exaggerated expectations did not come true. And another inclination is when we talk about total negative, like everything's bad around, everything is black, the life is pain. So basically, in fact, it's not objective, because in any situation we need adequate just analysis and multi-aspect view. So it's about pragmatism, it's about the adult conversation with the society, adult communication. In fact, now the society has passed that phase after the invasion when the people, no matter how difficult it is to say, but people have adapted to live under conditions of war. They've made their choices, they build their lives where they reside now, and they have a very serious demand for understanding, like, okay, what should we do next, and how do we reach it, how do we achieve that point. And it happens in all levels, on government, state management, on local level, on the level of business management, because the business has very high demands to understand the strategy of the state. The businesses have longer planning and budgeting cycles, and respectively, when we talk about communication, this is the aspect of objective and fair communication that I would like to re-emphasize. If on the 24th of February we were not ready to be told to disclose the situation honestly, how threatening it was, so today I think that the vast majority of the population is ready to this dialogue and are even demanding it. Let me just add a couple of words about the maturity. 70% of people did not apply for compensation, and half of them, 37%, said not because they don't need it, but they said that the state has higher priorities. It's a huge number of people, and it is an evidence of maturity. For me, it's very important. Even it's the better figure than those who state that they are ready to get involved in reconstruction processes. They say like, you do your thing and we'll get our compensation probably later. It's the evidence of changes in the minds of the society. Thank you very much for this conversation. And the last question for those who didn't make it watching the whole broadcast. Well, obviously on the website of Transparency International Ukraine we have more detailed results. There is the presentation uploaded there. We would like to thank USAID SACCI program, and we would like to thank Info Sapiens, who basically implemented this work upon our request. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear friends, for the interest to this topic. We would like also to thank our security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can have events like this. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.